I am bringing you to another panel which stays within the entrepreneurial theme and will focus on unpacking the innovations building city life as seen through the eyes of three of the world's greatest venture builders and startup accelerators. These are the people who have a bird's eye view on the cutting edge of high-tech application to our world. Please welcome to the stage your moderator, Amra Naidoo, General Partner of Accelerating Asia, joined by Alyssa and Bjorn.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think we have a lot to live up to. That was a massive introduction. The world's greatest venture builders. Okay, hopefully we can give you that kind of quality content today. So thank you very much for joining today's session. We're going to be talking about the innovations that are shaping city life. So my name is Amra Naidoo. As mentioned, I'm the co-founder and general partner at Accelerating Asia. I think Pooja, who was meant to be joining us as moderator today, is unfortunately not well, so I'm stepping up, and hopefully I don't mess that up, so please be kind. My plan is to only ask questions I can answer as moderator and speaker. So today I'm joined by two wonderful speakers that I have also had the pleasure of working with. Please welcome Alyssa, who is a fund manager at Entrepreneur First, and Bjorn, who is partner at Antler. So we have about 30 minutes for this action-packed panel, with speakers obviously representing different areas of the early stage startup ecosystem. So basically this panel is about how a simple product idea, which is carefully managed and nurtured by our two speakers here, can positively impact the lives of billions of people around the world. So let's start with some framing. Entrepreneur First and Antler are obviously very well known for being involved very early in the founding journey for entrepreneurs. So maybe if we could start by just telling us a little bit about what you do at your respective organizations, the regions you cover, maybe things that you specialize in, or if you have any specific focus areas. Bjorn, would you like to start first?
Sure, absolutely. So Antler, as you may know, is a very early stage investor. We have a $30 million fund now here in Singapore, and we are just currently raising a second one of 60 mil. We have recently opened up offices in Jakarta and Ho Chi Minh City that we are continuing to see a lot of innovation through. We have in Singapore and Indonesia and Ho Chi Minh City now around 100 portfolio companies here, and are planning to do between 60 to 80 investments this year approximately. So the way we do investments is of course interesting. We, generally speaking, source our talent from a pool of around 2,000 to 3,000 applicants that would come and join us here in Singapore through our Antler program, where we innovate and we build companies together with these founders. And then, if they are successful, it of course ends with an investment and ongoing support from our side. So that's a little bit how we operate.
Thanks, Bjorn. Alyssa?
Thanks. Entrepreneur First, we're the world's first talent investor. We started 11 years ago in London, and we now have 6 sites. So Singapore was our second site. We also have Bangalore to cover India. We also have Berlin, Paris, and Toronto is our latest site. So we do something very similar to you guys. You know, we invest in talent. We look for people who we think can be great entrepreneurs throughout their behavioral aspects that they have in the past. So we don't judge on ideas at all, so very different from a traditional accelerator or incubator. And also, hopefully, these people have areas they work on that could transform the world, really. So we take a bet on these people really, really early. They go through our Entrepreneur First program. We run 2 a year. Like Bjorn said, we also look at an application pool of around 2,000, 3,000 people every year. We only accept, I want to say, 2 to 5% of them. And then we invest in them. They do well. They become our portfolio companies. And actually, 4 out of the 16 innovation champions today are EF companies, I'm very proud to say. So congratulations to them.
Wow, awesome. Okay, so you guys probably compete. Can I say that? But thankfully, you actually provide a lot of deal flow for us. So at Accelerating Asia, we're a little bit later stage. We're pre-Series A focused, which means that we take in companies that have a little bit of revenue already, traction, and we are Southeast Asia and South Asia focused. So they provide awesome deal flow for us a little bit later down the stage. So this panel is basically about building for the future, and I think it's quite a big concept, especially building for cities. And arguably, I think across all of our portfolios, it's pretty much what all of our startups are doing, if you take a really big view about that. But zooming in a little bit about specifically what the description of this panel about, which is positively impacting billions of people's lives. So looking at that and some of the biggest challenges that our world is currently facing, so I'm talking about things like health and access to education, climate change, equality, financial inclusion, and things like that. Is this something that your entrepreneurs are actively working on? Or is this something that you're seeing as like a growing trend that people are getting more interested in? Is there an increase or decrease? Maybe Alyssa, would you like to start first? And also, if you have any case studies or portfolio companies, please tell us about them.
Yeah, for sure. You've covered a lot of areas, and definitely in terms of smart cities, sustainable cities, it is very broad. I would like to break it down into 3 different categories. So the first one is really infrastructure that exists and it's not obvious but needs to be improved on. I think we might tap into this later, but metaverse, everyone's going online. People wonder if it's still relevant, and it definitely is, because human beings exist in a physical world, and on these non-obvious infrastructure, it really stands out. So there are definitely opportunities in the space, and a lot of our portfolio companies are building on that, improving that, making them more efficient, more sustainable. One of our companies, Waste Labs, who's here, you hear for them later today. They're really optimizing waste collection, which you don't think about really, but it's very important in terms of living in this human world. And then if you go to other categories such as adaptability, you talk about climate change. Our environment's changing, is changing in really unpredictable ways, and we really need to adapt our environment to suit our needs. We have another company in our portfolio, Drip. They basically harness water out of the air for use in agriculture. So turning dry desert climate into arable land to grow agriculture. And then you also have adapting our behaviors in order to make it more sustainable for the future. So you heard from Shiok Meats just now, they're growing meat and seafood from cells as opposed to animals. Definitely more sustainable. It takes so much energy, agriculture, just to grow a single animal. And then you also have another one of our companies, Fiber. People are going to keep using plastic forever and ever, but what they're developing is a marine biodegradable solution. So instead of taking forever to disintegrate in a landfill, it disintegrates in water. So those are some examples.
So in your portfolio, or as you're scouting for talent, is this something that you're actively looking for, or is it just, kind of assessing as they come?
Kind of is assessing it as they come. So at Entrepreneur First, we don't limit ourselves. We're incredibly agnostic. As long as it solves a real problem, as long as we think you're the right team, the right founders to back this idea, we'll invest in you. It could be consumer, it could be software, it could be really, really deep biotech. So as long as we think the founder has a right to win that space, we're happy to do it. I will say, though, that to your question, in more recent years, like climate change and all of that is becoming a huge problem, and people are increasingly passionate about it. So yes, we're seeing a rise in that for sure.
Okay. And Bjorn, how about Antler?
Yeah, no, first thing I would say is it is a blessing to be in venture capital in this part of the world. It's very difficult not to see impact through the innovation that you bring on through the fund investments. So that's something that we are, of course, individually all very excited about. I think the big themes on our side is financial inclusion is, of course, a big one. We see a lot of companies that are working on that. And maybe a bit more historically, but also carbon recapture has been, of course, a big trend, right? On the financial inclusion side, it's a bit of an untraditional bet, you could say, but we have a company called Sandpool, which allows for remittance and transfer of money around the world. using a crypto backend entirely and thus providing more efficient rates and increased accessibility for these types of transfers. So that's an example of a company I'm personally very excited about.
And is this something that you are actively scouting for? Like, do you do the same as Entrepreneur First in that assess the talent pool, or do you have specific focus areas at Antler?
Yeah, so just like EF, we are also sector agnostic. So the way we get to express an interest and from a fund exposure perspective is by doing very targeted recruitment exercises. So as an example of that, at the moment, for instance, we're doing this big call for Web3 companies, which of course touches not only smart cities, but really all aspects of life and how we could potentially model future version of the internet.
Just a question I had, I mean, around supply and demand, right? So from a fund perspective, you obviously need to give returns to your investors, right? And you can see trends that you should be investing in compared to the supply of the entrepreneurs coming through. Does that always match up? And specifically, when you're talking about these kind of solutions, do you see a match there as well? I'm open. Alyssa, would you like to go first?
I mean, yeah, both of us as funds, we need to have a return to our investors, and we have the responsibility to do that. But they do trust us to do that with the talent pool we have. So I will say that we definitely don't make investments just to make investments. If they don't meet our quality standard, our bar, we don't think this is going to play out in the future, we won't make that investment. But in most cases, again, because we're so early stage, we're really taking a bet on the founding team, on this idea they're building. It may not be the best idea, but it could be in the right area. We expect a bunch of pivots. This happens all the time. And so we do have that responsibility to our LPs and all of that. But I think what we do is so important, and they understand that there is risk there because it's so early stage.
Yeah, so I think Alyssa raised a really good point earlier about founder market fit. So that's really the perspective we can take to be able to control our fund exposure a little bit and having a diverse set of companies ultimately in our portfolio base. But it's not entirely under our control, right? So if someone who's been in financial services his entire life and he comes in and he says he wants to build a makeup brand, for example, that's of course not something we can entirely control. But we control these expectations with the founders by highlighting always that founder market fit is incredibly important. So that the hope of that is, of course, that founders will optimize for what they're good at ultimately, which should be reflected in their work experience as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, at Accelerating Asia, we have a slightly different approach, obviously, because we're a later stage. And so we do invest, we do have specific focus areas that we are interested in. Impact is at the core of what we do. So 90% of our investments are in companies addressing one or more of the SDGs. And sustainable cities is pretty much embedded into the SDGs. So that is pretty much a core focus for us. And I think we cross very similar themes in terms of financial inclusion, education, clean energy, sustainability. So it's really cool to see that you have that focus as well, and that hopefully we can get more deals coming our way. I do want to talk about, I guess, the elephant in the room, which is COVID. And kind of want to understand a little bit about how this has impacted, I guess, what you guys do, and specifically whether you have seen any changes in the types of founders that are coming to you or the types of solutions that they're creating, and specific to, cities, future cities. Bjorn, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think luckily for us, being a very early stage fund, we weren't that heavily impacted by COVID, I would say, since we have an opportunity to pick the companies we think is going to be symbolic of what Southeast Asia needs in the future. So we are we're very early stage. I think big themes on our side, of course, and big trends that I'm sure you have seen as well is a lot of help with the mental side of COVID, to help people better find ways of socializing, to help with people that are stuck by themselves, or even to help remote workers that are stuck at home in maybe an apartment that is a bit too small for remote work, but having no other choice but to work from there anyway. So we have seen an onset of innovation that helps specifically around those themes quite a lot.
Alyssa?
Well, I think the biggest thing that affected our program is that we used to run in-person cohorts, and then we had to move to Zoom and be, really flexible about all of that. But in terms of trends, I think when COVID first hit, everyone kind of wanted to hop on that bandwagon, like, oh, I have a nanoparticle solution that will kill bacteria in visible light. But what we realized was that there were a lot of these sorts of solutions that they wanted to help with the COVID effort. But because of COVID, because of the lack of infrastructure, hospitals can't run these sorts of trials. It takes a lot longer because they're dealing with actual COVID. So then founders start shifting to what other ways can we help move everything online, whether it's digitization in terms of education. We have a couple of edtech portfolio companies just making education more accessible to people that otherwise can't travel to school because travel is restricted, et cetera. So many different things have come up because of COVID. And I just want to commend all the founders that have gone through Antler and EF during this period, because it's already a form of survival. You want to survive, but to take that step and to try entrepreneurship and to build a company, build something in like such a crazy world, really commendable.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because, we've seen something similar. We've definitely seen a massive increase in mental health support and solutions, access to healthcare in particular, producing locally. I think we saw a lot of shortage of vaccines and masks, and so a lot of startups are trying to address, how do we make this a lot more local food as well. I think there were food shortages in different places. Australia had a massive car shortage and is still going through that. So there's a lot of really interesting things that came up because of COVID. And what about on the investment side? So when we're talking about future cities and these kind of solutions, are the investors that you're working with looking out for these or not? Maybe Alyssa, would you like to go first?
I think it's something they're definitely looking out for. So you mentioned Accelerating Asia. Impact is a huge thing of what you do and what you've promised your LPs. Not all funds are like that, but I think always in the back of their mind, they're always thinking about how they're going to make the world a better place, and sustainability, impact, changing the world. Like that's always one of them. I have in some cases at our EF demo days, they'll be like, but how is this affecting all the different sustainability goals? We actually have a company with us that you'll hear later from today, ESGenie. They work directly with funds to pick out all the ESG things in their portfolio company documents, because it's so important for these funds now to be ESG compliant and all of that. So definitely it's a problem they picked up on. It's something I think they're solving, and they've got great traction. You'll hear from JT later. But it's definitely a mix. It depends on what the investor is focused on, whether it's impact, whether it's other sectors, et cetera. But I think it's something always in the back of their minds.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you should say that because, we don't really tell people we're an impact fund. We don't tell investors that. It's not something that we lead with because at the end of the day, most investors care about returns first. And then when you talk about impact or, I guess, sustainability or things like that, often it makes them question whether they're actually going to still get those returns. So oftentimes we don't talk about the impact side. We talk about, the businesses, their growth, and all that kind of stuff. And then after they're in, we're like, by the way, did you know all this impact you're creating? And hopefully change the minds. Have you, I don't know, what has your experience been like at Antler?
I would say similar to yours. I think people are, of course, very impact interested by default, right? And I think that's something that excites people and makes them feel happy about themselves before they go to sleep at night, when they can say that I have invested in a fund that has very positive impact on Southeast Asia. But of course, first and foremost, it's about financial performance. I think also people are a bit scared of, so if you look at smart city innovation, it tends to be, not always, but it tends to be relatively capital intensive usually, that type of innovation. It also tends to require a degree of government or regulatory influence or support, which makes it a little bit less accessible, I would say, especially for a very early stage VC, some of these themes. So we, as I said, mostly see this impact through financial literacy, financial sustainability, and mental wellness, etc. So those are topics that we see a lot of.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because a lot of times entrepreneurs are building solutions for problems that they know that they can directly impact. it takes, I guess, another level of rigor to start thinking about how can we involve governments for policy and how can we actually, build hardware or things like that. So we do have only a few minutes left, and I wanted to go into probably something a little bit more personal in terms of what you're personally interested in and excited about when we're talking about the future of cities and the potential for the future of cities. Like why are you doing what you're doing? What kind of world do you want to see? What kind of companies do you want to invest in? What kind of problems do you want to see solved? Alyssa, would you like to go first?
My answer is going to be very broad. But why I do what I do is because every year, twice a year, I get a whole bunch of very talented, aspiring founders or ex-founders who want to start something new and solve really big problems. And I'm always amazed, like every 6 months, like these new ideas that come out of them, these really impressive people, that's what keeps me interested. I work with them very closely when they're fundraising, and I learn a lot more about certain sectors of what they're doing. I recently helped, and this may be controversial in terms of sustainability, with a hydrogen company. So one of my companies, Sun Green H2, they use water electrolysis and produce green hydrogen. So, I know nothing about hydrogen beyond working with them, but I've learned so much. So that's what keeps me excited. What I want to see in the world is, all the biggest problems being solved. I know it's a big ask, but I think step by step, company by company, they're solving these seemingly little problems, but making such a big impact that in the future, it's going to be huge.
And do you have a vision for what city life would look like if all the EF companies got funded and did really well? Like, what kind of world would we be living in?
Well, definitely a much better world. Unfortunately, I don't have that macro view. If not, I'd start a company on my own, but not my thing. But definitely, it will be a better world. I think we'll be more, I mentioned adaptability. We'd be adapting the environment for our needs, but also adapting our own behavior to slow down the degradation and then the climate change and all of that. So I don't know what that looks like, but with all the companies from EF and from Antler solving these problems, I think it'll be a much better place.
And Bjorn?
Similar reason to what I do. I think every week I get to meet 20 or 30 people or so that have weird and wonderful ideas on how they want to make the world a better place, and I get to see the world through their eyes. I get to learn through them, and so that to me is what really excites me to keep doing what I'm doing day in and day out. I think, how would I want to see the city of the future? This is a very personal thing, and for me it's very simple. I want to see less cars everywhere. Less traffic, more green spaces, more mixed-use environment, so that I, for instance, can go down from my condo where I live now, meet my neighbors over a coffee down by the street, sit somewhere. I'm looking forward to a future that is more hyper-local and more inclusive from an everyday life point perspective.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. And it's part of the reason why I'm so supportive of Singapore's Green Plan, because I think it's such a beautiful vision for what the city could become. I think also personally, I'm super interested in elder care services and solutions, and we've seen quite a lot of them coming up very slowly. I think it's a massive opportunity, huge aging populations around the world. So how can we ensure quality of life and dignity as we're all aging, and especially towards the end of life? I think transport and mobility is a great point that you brought up as well. Climate is a massive thing, of course. I think we all know that most of the solutions already exist in the world to reduce our climate emissions and drastically make a difference. So it's a matter of us investing in them. We will do more to do that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to everyone for participating and listening in. Please feel free to come and talk to us after the panel. We would obviously love to tell you more about our portfolio companies and the work that we're doing. And thank you very much to the organizers for having us today. Well done, Bjorn. Well done, Alyssa. Thank you very much for your input.